1916, the First World War is underway. During a night battle with the Austrians, Italian soldiers notice one of their soldiers on the battlefield. It's a deserter named Giuseppe Marazzi. He escaped from his division, got lost, and returned to his fellow soldiers, certain that they were Austrians. When they begin to interrogate him, Marazzi lies that he was on patrol when they opened fire on him, so he ran in a random direction. Marazzi is put back into action, but all he can think about is escaping again. The Italian army is having a hard time. Due to lack of artillery, they had to abandon the heights of Monte Fiore, and now they are retreating, having lost 3,000 soldiers. At this time, a young Lieutenant Sasu arrives at the front, who wanted very much to participate in the fighting and came to the most dangerous place on the front of his own volition. Here the lieutenant is met by Captain Abadi, who was just watching the retreat of General Leone and his division. As the soldiers walk through the forest, they are fired upon by the Austrians. The scout commands everyone to stop, but the general strongly dislikes this. He summons Lieutenant Ottolenghi to him and orders him to find the person responsible for the halt. When the culprit is found, the general orders him to be shot without question. Ottolenghi is shocked at such an order, but he has to carry it out. He summons a scout and talks to him briefly on the sidelines, then notices the soldiers carrying the corpse of a soldier killed in a recent firefight. The lieutenant orders his soldiers to fire a volley into the air, and then tells them to take the soldier's corpse to the general. Ottolenghi lies to Leone that this is the scout who was ordered to be executed. The general is pleased with how quickly his orders were carried out and orders them to move on. Joining up with the rest of the troops, General Leone says that they are immediately sent to knock the Austrians out of the recently abandoned fortification. The general does not want the enemy to have time to gain a foothold there. Therefore, he is ready to spend any forces to retake Monte Fiore. At the same time, the commanders realize that the losses will now be much higher than in the defense of the height. When the division changes the place of deployment, approaching Monte Fiore from the other side, the general falls off his horse and rolls to the edge of the cliff. One soldier rushes to his aid and saves the general's life. As soon as Leone leaves, the other soldiers pounce on the rescuer and beat him severely. They hoped that the general would fall off the cliff and these senseless attacks would finally stop. During the night, Leone orders the taking of the high ground. He sends the soldiers into battle to the sound of fanfare. The Austrians respond with machine gun fire, stopping the advance. The next day, General Leone goes to inspect the trenches. First, he stops next to the private and asks him to take out his bayonet. The general notices a spot of rust on it and reprimands the soldier for it. He then stops by Lieutenant Ottolenghi and demands that he see to it that each soldier has a well-sharpened knife. The next stop is at Lieutenant Sasu's position. Here the general decides to shine with the accuracy of his vision and gives the distance to the Austrian trenches. This is not enough for him, and he rises to his full height above the trench to look through his binoculars. When the general is told that this could be dangerous, because there is an Austrian sniper working here, Leone is not the least bit afraid. The sniper does shoot, but does not hit the target. The general then orders Corporal to stand in his place. Sasu tries to stop Corporal by saying that the snipers will adjust their fire and won't miss this time, but Leone insists, and eventually Corporal is killed. The general admires his action and calls him a hero. Sometime later, Major Malchiotti orders the captain to assign soldiers to cut a large hole in the barbed wire near the enemy position. The soldiers are given wire cutters and sent on the mission. The Austrians open fire on them and kill most of the group. It is also discovered that the wire cutters that the soldiers were issued cannot bite through the barbed wire. Then the major orders to bring serviceable wire cutters and sends the men to the barbed wire again. This time they send Lieutenant Santini along with a private. The lieutenant refuses to volunteer. He realizes that he will be killed there. But when the major gives the order, Santini climbs out of the trench and goes to the barbed wire. The lieutenant sees no point in hiding and approaches the fence at full height. Eventually, Santini and the private are killed by Austrian machine gunners. Afterward, the soldiers stage a riot. Lieutenant Ottolenghi's men also want to go riot, but the commander stops them. Ottolenghi is willing to stand with them, but only if they do the right thing. The lieutenant agrees to overthrow the government if necessary, but not like this, not in war. The rebels are quickly subdued and decide to be executed. But then, after studying the laws of war, the officers decide to shoot every 10th soldier. Ottolenghi does not allow his soldiers to carry out the cruel order. Then the commanders recruit a firing squad of other soldiers and execute every 10th rebel. Shortly thereafter, the soldiers return to the trenches. Here the officer shows the soldiers how well the Austrian sniper shoots. He opens a narrow observation window in the loophole and sweeps a twig and then a cigarette past it. The sniper shoots at such small targets. This position is considered the most dangerous because the Austrian gunner has never missed yet. Meanwhile, General Leon orders the soldiers to put on iron armor and sends them to cut the barbed wire. The general believes that the armor is invulnerable and takes a long time to explain this to the soldiers. However, the enemy machine gunner shoots all the soldiers in iron armor without any problems. After that, the rest of the forces are thrown into the attack, but they can't capture the height either. At some point, the Austrians even rise above the fortifications and ask the Italians to stop, stopping these senseless attacks. But General Leon orders the soldiers to go forward. Lieutenant Ottolenghi can't stand it, orders his men to turn back and attack the general. At this point, Ottolenghi is wounded. Sasso orders him to be carried to cover, but by the time Ottolenghi is brought to the trench, he is dead. The general remains unhappy that the soldiers did not take the high ground. He decides to take it out on Lieutenant Sasso, deciding that the loopholes were made incorrectly. Leon decides that it is their fault that the offensive failed. Sasso admits that it is his sector and he is responsible for creating the loopholes. As a result, the lieutenant has to listen to Leon's long admonition. Meanwhile, the wounded soldiers return to the trench. The general's words about the wrong loopholes seem absurd to Sasso. The lieutenant hatches a plan to deal with Leon once and for all. Sasso invites the general to inspect the loophole that has been shot through by an Austrian sniper all this time. But when the general looks out the observation slit, the sniper doesn't kill him. Leon looks through the window long enough, but the shooter does not show up. Then Sasso brings a twig to the window and the sniper immediately shoots at it. Meanwhile, a special committee interrogates the wounded to determine if they were really wounded on the battlefield. There's a doctor here to find out if the shot was fired at point-blank range or from afar. There's also a Colonel Stringery sitting in, who makes up stories about how the soldiers actually got wounded. And no matter what wounds they come to him with, he recognizes everyone as deserters and sends them to court-martial. The colonel believes they all shot themselves to be away from the front lines. At the same hospital where the commission was meeting, Lieutenant Sasso arrives to visit a battle comrade. Captain Abadi, who met him on his arrival at the front, is wounded, and he is now lying in a hospital bed. Sasso gives him a good cognac as a gift. At the time of their first meeting, the lieutenant had not yet been drinking, but now he admits that he occasionally consumes alcohol. Soon afterward, winter begins. Private Marazzi runs out of a snow-covered trench and runs towards the Austrians. He doesn't want to fight anymore and tries to escape again. The Austrians are ready to accept him, but the Italians shoot Marazzi in the back, and he remains lying in the snow forever. Sometime later, General Leon goes to check the trenches. A rumor passes among the soldiers that he has been killed, and the soldiers, along with Lieutenant Sasso, decide to celebrate the event. But at their celebration, the general suddenly appears alive. It turns out that the rumor about his death was not true, so the soldiers have to buy Leon a drink. Sasso lies to the general that they are drinking alcohol because their regiment's banner has won an award. As the snow melts, the Italians are again thrown into an attack on the Austrian positions. This time they are given artillery to support them. However, the artillerymen start firing at their fellow soldiers, and no one responds to requests to adjust the fire. Then the soldiers are driven into a shelter and are not allowed out of there. Shells start hitting these shelters, and the soldiers try to break out into the open sky to escape. They succeed. Major Malchiotti is infuriated by this behavior of the soldiers. He orders Lieutenant Sasso to shoot every 10th deserter, but he refuses, citing a provision of the law that forbids the major to make the decision to shoot. Then Malchiotti himself assembles a firing squad and orders the rioters to be killed. But the soldiers shoot in the air. Realizing that they have violated his direct order, Major Malchiotti decides to personally kill those sentenced to execution. At that moment, the firing squad opens fire on him. Lieutenant Sasso is found guilty of deserting and killing the major. When he is brought before the general, Sasso confesses that he has become an opponent of the war and has acted on the battlefield out of his sincere convictions. For this, General Leon orders his execution. Lieutenant Sasso is shot, and that is the end of the movie.